All right, good morning. I am recording. Today is Monday, the 3rd of April, day number 57. Remember, we only meet Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. We're off Friday, and we're of the class. What I was going over 8 and 9 today, and then 10 and 11 tomorrow. That may be a little much. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just do a chapter a day. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess we'll find out. All right. The other thing I want to do today is I've gotten emails from, I'd say probably a good third of the class where people are saying that I was okay with the HTML stuff. I was okay with the JavaScript stuff, but I was okay with HTML and CSS, but this JavaScript stuff is kind of knocking me for a loop. And in particular, I had people who were having problems with the stopwatch and the clock. All right, so I'm going to go over those as we start today. All right, so I guess if you haven't turned it in yet, but most people have turned in their work. I tried to do a lot of grading this weekend. The only thing I don't have graded right now is the test you took um, late last week. I believe at least. I believe everything else has been graded. Now, if you've got something that you say, well, I turned this in and it hasn't been graded yet. Now, this was yesterday as of about noon. So if you turned in something last night, no, I haven't graded it yet. All right. But like I said, I've done the best I could to try to catch back up again. All right. So again, we will go over in just a minute. We're going to go over the clock and the stopwatch. Tomorrow, as it says, we'll go over Murach's chapter 9. We'll do 8 today. Wednesday, we'll do Murach chapter 10, and Thursday, we'll do Murach chapter 11. What that means as well, when you take a look up here, this section is on, as it says, jQuery Essentials. The first chapter is they say it gets you off to a fast start with jQuery. Yeah, it shows you a lot of the stuff that's involved in jQuery. Chapter 9 is kind of a gee whiz type of chapter because what a lot of people like to use jQuery for are special effects and animations, etc. So yes, we'll look at that. To me, one of the strongest parts of jQuery is chapter 10 and the way you can use it for working with forms, in particular form validation. And then finally in chapter 11, we'll look at the jQuery UI. So yes, we will go over all of those. All right. And what I plan on doing, probably a little more than what we have done in the past, is I'm going to go over some of the programs that are in the book in the chapter itself. All right. And so what I'm going to do in just a second is I'm going to go over the no magic bullet out there that I can say, hey, go to this website, look at this video or whatever, and you'll learn how to program in JavaScript. It just doesn't work that way. All right. I know that I had somebody who contacted me, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, again saying, hey, I'm just really struggling with this JavaScript stuff. And the person had a very strong A, going into this part of the class. And they said, I just really don't know where to get started or whatever. And, you maybe have seen this before, but again, I would start with going to w3schools.com, go down to the tutorials and choose to learn JavaScript. There's a lot of stuff in here. I mean, a lot. I wouldn't expect you to go through all of it, but it's at least a really nice place to start, even if you only go through part of it per day. All right. Now we're going to start in jQuery, and notice they also have a jQuery tutorial in here. And again, not as long as the other one, but a lot of stuff in here as well. All right, so that's not a bad place to start. I've mentioned before that this is the Mozilla website, dev.mozilla.org. And under their references, they've got a JavaScript reference in here. This is very well done. Notice tutorials for complete beginners. All right. And again, first steps, building blocks, etc. And again, there's a lot of stuff in here that, when they get into the intermediate and the advanced stuff, we don't have time to go through that stuff now. We actually go through some of the stuff that's in there, but not nearly at the level and depth and breadth of coverage that they do. All right. And one more site that I would recommend. All right. And that is to go out to, it's called Free Code Camp. All right. And I don't know if it's .com or .org. This looks weird, but I thought there was a .org. So let's see. Well, I'm not sure if that's it or not. No, I don't want to go through and throw something else at my browser, but I'll try to find that one out for you. I even went in and Googled this morning, easiest way to learn JavaScript. Well, there's a JavaScript for dummies. There's articles out there. The 5 best ways to learn JavaScript fast. How to learn JavaScript in 2023. And you know what? None of these agree on the exact best way to learn it. All right. So let's go in and let's take a look. In fact, I'm just going to grab it right now. So let's see. So I don't remember, but I'm going to quick look. Whoops, it's for the other class. So let's see. This is clock and stopwatch. So this is the extra exercises. And I'm going to just grab these extra, not the solutions. I'll just grab the starts. All right. Now I've done these before, but it's been a while. So hopefully I won't screw them up too badly, but we'll just see what we've got here. So again, this was chapter 7. So I'm literally bringing up first this clock here. So if we bring it up, okay, you can see what we've got built in here. I'm going to make it bigger. All right. And you can see so with the interface is built, we've even got our colons in there. So I don't believe we're going to have to do anything at all. I don't believe we're going to have to do anything at all to the CSS or to the JavaScript or to the HTML. Let's open this up with code. All right. And let's start by quickly looking at the HTML that's in here. You can see it's about 20 lines. All right. So I'm looking in here to see if there's going to be anything we're going to have to touch. I don't think so. All right. The CSS by now, that should make sense to you too. Again, you want to play around with it a little bit. So let's just jump right into this. All right. So we're jumping again right into the actual JavaScript here itself. All right. Now, by now, you've at least heard me mention to you, all right, this use strict. And all that does basically is it's coming in and it's saying, hey, if you try to use a variable before you've declared it, flag it as being an error. That's really what it does, more than anything else. All right. This is our alias. We've talked about that before. I don't think we have to talk about that anymore. What this is doing, just so you know, is for your hours, your minutes, and your seconds, if any of them are before 10, so 1 through 9, or really 0 through 9, it's going to add a beginning 0 at the beginning. So it looks a little better. That's all. So we have to come in here and create this display current time. We're going to write that in just a minute. All right. And then we've got to come in here with our DOM loaded. All right. And you can read it. I'm not going to read it out loud to you. All right. But what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to write this function in here. And we want to call this function every second because that's displaying the current time. All right. So we want to call display current time. All right. And we want to set an interval here. And we want to call it again to call display current time. And we want to call it every second. So hopefully what I'm about to say to you makes sense. I'll throw these semicolons in here because that's what the author has. This is calling it the initial time. So literally, if I called it right, say like 8:15:43 or something like that. This is calling it every time except for that first second. Now that should make sense to you. That really and truly should make sense to everybody. Now it says don't store a timer object. It won't be needed. The clock will just automatically run by itself. All right. So let's go up and take a look at what's in here. Okay. All right. And first of all, let's think about what we need. Well, the first thing we're going to need in here, the first thing we're going to need to get the time. That should make sense. All right. And the way that you typically grab the time is you grab a date object. And that date object will give you the month, the day, the year, the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. So we grab that, and I think also the milliseconds. So it gives you about 7 or 8 or 9 pieces of information, of which we're really only concerned with about 3 of them: the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. All right. So I'm going to come in here, and we could do a const or we could do a let. It's not going to matter. We can call this whatever we want. We could call this current time, whatever. All right. It's kind of typical. People usually call it now. Okay. And they set that equal to a new date object. Now we're going to have a chapter after we get through the section on jQuery. We're going to have a chapter that's going to talk, amongst other things, about the date object in more detail. So yeah, we're using something we really haven't talked about very much. All right. Now, what we want to grab from there then, okay, is we want to grab the hours. And when you are grabbing something from this, you use what are called getters. You're saying, get the hours. So I could get the hours, I could get the minutes, I could get the seconds, etc. And we'll look at all that in just a minute. All right. But for now, we're concerned with getting the hours. And the reason for that is it's going to give us military time. So for right now, it'll be 08:18 something, and that's fine. But if it was 8 o'clock at night, it's going to give us 20:18. So we need the hours so we can check whether or not those hours are greater than 12. And if they are greater than 12, so for instance, 1 in the afternoon is going to give us 13. So we're going to want to subtract 12 from there, and we'll want to make sure that we're about to set something AM, PM. We'll want to make sure that it's set to PM if it's noon, between noon and 11 o'clock at night, and that it's set to AM if it's between midnight and 11 AM. All right. Hopefully that makes at least a little bit of sense. So let's say here, let hours, and we'll set that equal to now, what we just put in there, dot, and notice this, the stuff that it's finding already. Well, what we care about is the get hours. All right. So again, if I ran that right now and I did an alert on that. So if I did an alert and I said in fact, we'll do it like this. The current hour is plus hours. Let's see what that gives us. Oh, wait. The current hour is 8. Well, that's good. It is after 8 o'clock, so that's good. Again, we haven't done anything as far as filling this in, and that's okay. And actually, I've got it in a loop right now because it's running every second. So let me get rid of that. And I'm, of course, wouldn't keep that in there, but I just wanted to show you that. So we've now grabbed our first piece of information that we need right here. So I'll comment that out. All right. Now, we also need to designate whether or not what we're using is either going to be AM or PM. All right. And what do I mean? Well, we're going to create a variable in here that's changeable. So we can, whoops, sorry. we can call it whatever we want, but since it's AM, PM, let's call it that. And we'll set it equal to that. This is up to us, but let's just set it to AM for right now. And it's AM, PM, not AM, PN. There. Again, we can call it whatever we want. All right. Now, what we want to do is we want to come in here and we want to get the correct hour and the correct AM, PM for display, to display. And again, there are plenty of ways that we can do this. All right, what do I mean? Well, the easiest way is I can check the hours. So if the hours is greater than 12, and hopefully what I'm saying right now is just something that makes sense, that if the hours are greater than or equal to 12, we have to convert it over from military time to standard time. All right, so if that's the case, I'm just going to put a comment here to say convert hours from military to standard. And that's an easy thing to do because all it is hours minus equal 12. I mean, if you wanted to, you could say hours equal hours minus 12. All right, but this is our shortcut. Not only that, we know that we have previously set this to AM. Well, now we know that that's wrong. So we can come down in here and we can set that equal to PM. All right. Now, as always, typically when you have an if, you also have an else with it. Well, if this is the case, all right, then there's two things we have to take into account. All right. 0 to 11, all we have to basically do is make sure that AM is set. All right. But if it's noon, we don't want to subtract 12 from it. But we do have to let the system know that indeed it is PM. All right. So we can do this any way we want to do it. Again, we can do this any way we want to do it. All right. So we can do a switch here. We could just check to see what the hours is. We could do all sorts of stuff. Let's do a switch. We'll do a switch on hours. And really, there's only two cases in here that we care about. All right. And that is noon and midnight. Why do we only care about those? We've already said, give us our hours. We've already set the default to AM. All right. But if it's greater than 12, now we set it to PM. So really, we've got everything set except that midnight and noon are a little bit different between those. What do I mean? Noon, we don't want to subtract 12 on it, but we do want to set it to PM. All right. Midnight, what we'll do is we'll set that equal to 12 rather than it being 0, 0. So those are the two different things, so to speak, that we're going to do. So I'm going to say here case 12. And what does that mean? It's noon. All right. So in that case, no pun intended, AM PM is going to be equal to PM. All right. And that's really all I have to do right there. So I can break. But for case 0, what does that mean? It's midnight. All right. So I want to do two things. I'm going to set the hours equal to 12. I think it looks better than having it say 0, 0. All right. If you don't agree, you could leave that off. But again, the AM PM, it probably already was equal to AM, but why take a chance? So we'll set that equal to AM. And again, we'll break. Now, that's the only two things we're worrying about here. But we can come in and just do a default here that just says break. There's nothing, whoops, there's nothing we want to do otherwise. All right. So we now have handled really the four possibilities in here. And what I mean is that it's a straight AM time that's, let's say, between 1 AM and 11 AM. That was already handled. All right. Military time, which we just handled previously, which is times that are between, really, that are between 1 PM and 11 PM. And now we just handled noon and midnight. All right. So what we basically want to do right now is we've got everything we need and we just have to put it up on the screen. All right. So before we do that, I'm just going to put it down here. But before we do that, let's take a look at what we call this stuff. All right. So pretty simply, just hours, minutes, seconds, and AM, PM. All right. And I want to say this is not a slam against anybody in this class, but I don't understand why with some of you, your programs are not working. You insist upon putting that there. And many times when you do that, it doesn't work. All right. You typically don't have to do that. All right. I mean, I ran a few of the tests and their logic and stuff was correct, but they put in an extra forward slash at the beginning. And when you ran it, it wasn't giving any output. That isn't good. All right. So again, it's hours, minutes, seconds, and AM, PM. I like the way they've done that here and they've used it like this. And they also used hours for their variable in the program and they used AM, PM for the variable in their program. And I think that's a good idea to do it that way. All of these, they're spans. These is put in there as a span. Why do I care? I care because when we come in here and we do this, we're not setting a value, so to speak. When you have values, that's when you're putting something into a text box. We're not here. So we're just going to be using text content. That's all we should have to use in here. And we've got four things. All right. So doesn't matter the order in which we put them, but I might as well put them in the right order. So first are hours. So hours dot text content equal hours. Okay, there's the first one. Then we've got minutes. Now we haven't done anything special with minutes, but there is a now for the now variable we have, there's a get minutes and there's a get seconds. Now we're going to use both those right now, but we also want to make sure that we use this. So again, if it's before 10 for any of these, all right, if it's before 10, we should now be set. All right. So in other words, we come in here and we've got equal add single digit now dot get minutes. And I'm just going to copy this line down. And we're going to do the same thing with seconds. And finally, the last thing that we should want to do in here is to set our AM PM. All right. And I'm going to do a file, save all on this, and then come over here, try to run it, see what we get. Okay. Now, if you want to, you don't have to do this, but if you want to, as I just was thinking about it as we were doing this, all right, we could have also come through and on the end here, whoops, over here, there's nothing to stop us from putting this in there as well. I would think this would work. And now it should say 08 if I did it right. Okay. if that looks better to you. But you can see we now have a running clock. All right. It's not beautiful. All right. But it's also not much code. We put in about 40 lines of JavaScript, and really for even our interface for the clock and stuff wasn't that bad. All right. Now, there are other ways that you can do there's other things that you can do, etc. When we get done, I just wanted to tell you this. When we get done with the jQuery part of the class, what I'm very seriously thinking of doing, and probably will do, is we're going to build a website together as a class, and we're going to put some of everything we've done, or just about, because it's kind of like to pull stuff together. And I'll ask you to extend that a little bit. I think that'll help as we go into the last part of the class. All right. So I'm taking for granted, I think you got this one done anyway, but I'm just going to take for granted that if you've got any questions on this, that you'd ask. Hopefully it was pretty straightforward. And also hopefully for those of you who are having trouble with this, that helped. All right. So let's bring up the other one, which is the stopwatch. So I'm going to close both of these. All right. And I'm going to do a file, save on here, and another one on here. And I'm going to close this. All right. So that's closed. Just close this. And now I'm going to bring up the other one, which was the stopwatch here. In fact, I don't want that. Where do we bring these? Exercise starts. All right. Oops, wrong one. Not the exercise. Oh, I thought it was here. Let's see. For the class, where did I bring this? Sorry, this has just been a weird morning already for me. So let's see. There we go. So let's bring this one up now in code as well. All right. Now, much of it is going to look similar to what we just did. What do I mean? We'll take a look here. The first 20 or 25 lines probably look pretty much the same. All right. The same thing we had before, hours, minutes, seconds, and AM, PM. What's new is down here. So now we've got a start, we've got a stop, and we've got a reset. And you can see for those, since it's a stopwatch, we'll have minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And since milliseconds are 1,000th of a second, you'll notice that that's set up immediately. It's basically set up to show 3 with 3 zeros. All right. So I don't think, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there's going to be anything in here we have to change. I just wanted to show you the names, etc., that we're going to be using in here. Now, there's more typing in here. All right. This is going to take us till our first break. All right. But I'm going to open up here clock.js, and you'll notice they already gave us a bunch of stuff. All right. And I use this as a prototype when I was setting everything up. So we've got all that stuff. All right. So even if you had problems, you probably, I guess, could have looked at this one, and that would have probably helped you with the first one. All right. So let's see what else we have in here. So again, we've got all the same stuff that we had at the beginning as far as displaying the time. I'm not going to go over that at all because we just did. So this is the stopwatch stuff. All right. You'll notice we have a timer. Then we have elapsed minutes, elapsed seconds, and elapsed milliseconds. We don't have an hours in here because typically for a stopwatch, wouldn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to do that. All right. Now, we're told in here what to do. So notice increment milliseconds by 10 milliseconds. So I could say, you can see that this is called elapsed milliseconds right here. That should do that, I would think. Or again, we could have said elapsed milliseconds equals elapsed milliseconds plus 10. All right. All right. So if the milliseconds, in fact, I'm going to move this down and put this over 2 lines so a little easier to read. If the milliseconds total is 1,000, all right, then increment seconds, because there's 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second rather. All right, so there's really, when you think about it, what do we want to do here? Well, we want to say if elapsed milliseconds is equal to 1,000, there's really two things that we want to do here. We want to add 1 to our seconds, so we can say plus plus elapsed seconds. All right, plus we want to set the milliseconds back to 0. All right, like that. All I'm doing is I'm just following the steps they gave us here. So again, we're making some checks in here. What I'm going to do, I don't know if this will help, hurt, or whatever, but when we get done, we're going to write something real quick because I just wanted to show you something. All right. Okay. So we've done that. Now we want to go up and now we want to see if seconds. All right. We have to see here if seconds is total to 60. And if it is, again, we want to come in here and we want to increment our minutes by 1 and reset our seconds to 0. Very similar to what we did up here. I could copy it down, but I'm not going to. But I'm going to say if elapsed seconds is equal to 60, all right, we want, well, I like to say plus plus first, but it doesn't really matter. Elapsed minutes, all right, and we want to reset elapsed seconds back to 0. Now I'm going to leave that up for just a second, all right, and hopefully at least that makes sense. We're just making checks in here. And we're seeing, hey, have we reached 1 second? If we have, add 1 to our seconds and reset our milliseconds, which is kind of our seconds counter. All right, reset that to 0. Then we want to see if our seconds has reached 60. If it has, another minute has passed. So we want to add 1 to our minutes counter and reset elapsed seconds to 0. All right. Then finally, we want to come in here and we want to display, but now what we're displaying in here is the stopwatch time, not our regular time, but the stopwatch time. The regular time is already going to be displaying. But again, if I look in here, let me bring this back up. Again, this was S minutes, S seconds, and S MS for milliseconds. Okay. So under this display, I'm going to just, because it'll go a little faster. Where is that? I'm going to steal this and then just make a couple changes to it. All right, so what do we want to change in here? Well, we want to say S minutes. We want to say S seconds. And we want to say S milliseconds, which they called MS. All right, and this is going to be equal again to a pad single digit, but it's going to be elapsed minutes. All right, this will be another pad single. All right, and this one will be elapsed seconds. And this last one, let's just line them up so it's a little easier to read. This will be elapsed milliseconds. All right. And I don't know, we can still do the padding. It might look a little funky, I don't know. But that's elapsed milliseconds. So that should print everything out for us. We're not done yet, but we're almost there. All right. Then you'll notice when we take a look over here, what do we have? Well, we've got our stopwatch. Prevent default action of link. By now, what we're doing here should make sense to you. We're passing in the event. And remember, if we want the default event not to occur, because again, when you click a button, by default, it's supposed to try to go somewhere. We can say EVT dot prevent default, just like that. And that'll make sure that indeed, all right, that is prevented from going on. All right. So what do we have? Do first tick of stopwatch and then set interval timer to tick stopwatch every 10 milliseconds. Okay. Store timer object in stopwatch timer variable so next two functions can stop timer. So remember what we are attempting to do in here, all right, is we want to be able to play with a stopwatch. So what is that? Well, it was called tick stopwatch, the stopwatch. So we will call tick stopwatch, but that'll only give us an initial time. So if we did that, we would just have a time. We want this now to set an interval on this, and the interval we want to set is every 10 milliseconds. So we want to say here stopwatch timer is equal to set interval. So we want to keep calling that, that tick stopwatch, and we want to call it every 10 milliseconds, just like that. All right. Now that's going to start it, but then we want to come in here and we also want to make sure we can stop it. All right. So the first thing we want to do is again, prevent that default from happening. All right. And to stop a timer, you do a clear interval. And we want to clear what? The stopwatch timer. Just like that. So we now should have our start and our stop, hopefully at least, are going to be enough to do. Well, it says we have to reset everything. So now we can start it and we can stop it, but we want to come in here and be able to reset. So that'll again prevent the default action. To stop it, we just said right here. So I can copy this same line down. All right. And what's left is to reset everything. So what do we want to reset? Everything's in our stopwatch. So we want to set the minutes, the seconds, and the milliseconds back to whatever value they had originally. All right. So I want to come in here and do this $sign. And the first one is S minutes. And I want to set its text content equal to 00. Oops. Then I want to do the same thing for seconds. And finally, I want to do the same thing for milliseconds. And that was set equal to 3 zeros. That's how it was set up originally. All right. Now, what do we have left in here? Well, our event listener, okay, set initial clock display, and then set an interval timer to display every second. Again, you don't have to store the timer object. it just will run. So we've got our display here and our set interval, which is going to make it bump up every second. Okay, that's what we did before for our time. All right, now we have to make sure, as it says, right now, it's not going to work because we don't have anything where we have, quote, registered event listeners with the click event for the different things that are, on the stopwatch. So let's put those in and then we're done. Let me copy this. So we've got start, here will be stop, and here will be reset. And this is called stopwatch. And this one is called reset stopwatch. All right, just like that. So let's save it. Try to run it and see if it's working. First thing to check, of course, is our time working? And that looks like it is. So that's a good start. Now, let's start this and see it's coming. And every time it reaches 1,000, the seconds is updating. All right, I'm going to let this run. Why? Just to make sure that when we hit 60, that the minutes goes up as well. All right, then we will stop it and sorry, so you got seconds, but you can kind of see what's going on here. And if you really wanted to, we could have padded this out and made it 4 digits. So when it got to the 1,000, but really what's happening is it's never showing the 1,000. All right, once it does that, it's just bumping this up. So really using it with 3 like this is probably the best way of doing it. All right, so in 10 seconds, and good. You can see our minute is working as well. So if we stop now and we reset and start it up again, stop, reset, looks to me like it's working. All right. So hopefully at least that helped, if nothing else, just to kind of get you over the hump. So it's making a little bit more sense. All right. All right. If you are watching this again on tape, those of you, and you still have questions, please let me know. Right. I'll be glad to try to work with you to help you. All right. So again, we're about to go into chapter 8 now. And as it says, this is going to present a subset of jQuery. There's a lot of tables and charts and whatever in here to get us started. Again, tomorrow we'll do chapter 9 where we'll talk about effects and animations. The big thing with effects and animations is use them, don't abuse them. In other words, you can take and you can make the whole site about effects and animation and take away from the quality of the site itself by putting too much of that in. Chapter 10, we'll talk about jQuery and forms. In chapter 11, we'll look at the jQuery UI and talk a little bit about plugins as well. All right, so let's get started on this right now. We will look at the email list application. We will look at the 3 illustrative applications at the end of the chapter as well. All right. But if we can, between now and whenever, get through so we're about on 254, that'd be great. So we'll take a break and then we'll come back and we can look at the email list application and the other 3 as well. There's 4 applications that they discuss in here, and they even mention it. So one thing I want to tell you is it's very interesting. They mention in the book here that of the top 10,000 websites, as far as number of visits, approximately 70% of them use jQuery. 7 out of 10, that's, if I hear there's a 70% chance of rain, I'm going to think it's going to rain. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is a few years ago, rather than 70%, was 80%. All right. What you're finding is JavaScript itself is getting more and more powerful. All right. And as it is getting more and more powerful, the number of people, the number of new developers coming in and using jQuery is actually going down. A big thing happened with Bootstrap when Bootstrap went from version 4 to version 5. Version 4 required jQuery for virtually everything you did. Version 5 does not. All right. And when I say that, I'm not trying at all to diminish jQuery. It's still out there. It'll be out there for a while. It'll still be used by a lot of people. But there it is, just one tool that you can put into your toolbox, so to speak. So before the break, we'll talk about what jQuery is, how it simplifies development rather, and then different things on the basics, as you can see right here. So let's get started. As always, I want to concentrate more on the odd number pages on the right of your textbook and less on the textual portions, all right, the even number pages. But they do summarize here, and they do define jQuery. It's free, which is what a lot of people will, of course, like. It's open source, and open source just means you can look at the code. You can, if you want to, change the code or your copy of it. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but you can do that. All right. It is a JavaScript library. So the key thing to realize on there, it is still JavaScript. All right. So it says to provide the different features of jQuery, it provides a lightweight compressed library that loads quickly. We may have even looked at that before. We're going to look at it again in just a minute anyway. All right. So some of the reasons that jQuery is so popular. All right. First, as it says, jQuery functions are coded and tested for cross-browser compatibility. So not only do they work in all browsers, but they pretty much look the same. There's a consistent look and feel between them. All right. And as they say, years ago, that was a bigger thing because stuff oftentimes didn't work the same, or worked in one browser, didn't work in another. That's why sites that I've shown you, sites like that, as it says, today, most browsers provide consistent support for JavaScript. So cross-browser compatibility isn't as big a thing. However, this is a key one. Not only does jQuery provide support for older browsers and legacy websites, as they mentioned, but it also provides newer features and functionality that otherwise couldn't be used on older browsers. And that's what they're saying here. The jQuery selectors that we'll start looking at after the break are CSS3 compliant. Who cares? Well, that means even if you've got a really old version, you're using IE, Internet Explorer, back in version 6 or whatever, you can still use jQuery features. All right. And like I said, it's not that big a thing. Now, notice, as I said to you, and I said 70%, I guess it's 74. And I thought it was the top 10,000, it's the top 10 million. So again, if 7.4 million websites out of the top 10 million are still using jQuery, it's not going to go away. All right. But a lot of the new development that's being done is using ways other than jQuery. All right, we'll just leave it at that. Now, when you go out to the website, we've looked at this already. I know we did in another period, but I'm going to go out there anyway. So if you go out to jQuery.com, it's one of those websites that's pretty darn ugly. There's two big things on here that you need to realize. Number one is there's where you go to download. All right. And number two, there's the API documentation. Now, I'm not saying the other stuff in here isn't important, but if you understand those two things, all right, you're pretty golden. And what I mean is if I click here on the download jQuery, you'll notice I get a whole bunch of stuff. There's been a bunch of versions of jQuery. The newest version, according to this, looks like it's 3.6.4. All right. And notice that there's both a compressed and an uncompressed version. If I click on the compressed, there it is. That's jQuery, but it's been minified. Now, you may or may not be aware of this. You may or may not care about this. But for most computers, all right, when they start to go through and compile a program or whatever, and that's really what this is they throw out any white space they don't need. That's what's happening here when you've minified it. Any white space that's not needed by the computer has been removed. Now, there's still white space. If you look in here, notice this type of, like right there, there's white space there. But the unnecessary white space has been removed. All right. Why should you care? Because if all you want to do is have jQuery available in your program, you typically would want to download the minified version because since that white space has been removed, since the file has indeed been minified, it's smaller in size, so it'll load faster. All right. So that's, I mean, if you say big deal, that's the big deal about it. All right. On the other hand, if I go back out here, I'm going to leave that up. And if I go out to jQuery.com again, and again, click on this, but now choose the uncompressed version, that's the same file. And it's, last time I looked, it was, I think, 10,000 or something like that lines long. I don't know. I don't care. But it's the same file, but now it's not minified. So it will take longer to load. All right. Does that matter? Well, if you've got a site that's real-time sensitive, in other words, if you've got a site that you want to give or need to give people information as fast as possible, then it might matter. All right. Also notice the last time this has been changed. 3.8. So it's about as up to date as it could be. It's about not even a month old. All right. Okay, couple more things. I also mentioned on here, so you saw the compressed and the uncompressed version. And I mentioned the documentation. If you go here, these are the different methods that exist. And you can see I'm going through these. There's well over 100. I don't know how many there are. I don't care. But just let's grab the first one here, I think, which was add. If I click on that, what it does is it brings up the page for that. Why do you care? Well, you could read through it, get the description, but sometimes it's best just to get a programmatic example. I'm not going to touch this, all right, other than to mention to you, if you look here, notice what they're bringing in. There's the script statement, all right, and they're actually throwing the JavaScript right in here. And what have they done? Well, they've gone through and they've shown you how you can add something, all right, to what's existing. Sometimes they'll even add code and then more code and then more code, etc. And you can see this is very much, I think at least, patterned after W3 schools because they explain something to you, they give you an example, really encourage you to use their code. All right, that if it helps. Now, maybe you're good enough, I'm sure not good enough, that I can go through and memorize all this stuff. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the things that are in here that you would be most apt to use. And that's really what the chapter pretty much does. All right, so I'm not going to read a bit of this. You can take a look at it because I think we've now covered all of this stuff. All right. So they say, how can it simplify development. I think this is a good spot, even though I was going to go a little further. Let's stop right here because it is nine. In fact, it's 9:00. Well, it's 9 o'clock. Let's come back at 9:12. It's just about 9:01. So let's come back at 9:12 and we'll see if we can finish up this chapter by 10 o'clock. All right, I'm back. During the break, I was looking at an article here, and it's called Seven Tricks to Take the Performance of Your Website to the Moon. The only reason I bring it up is when you start looking at it, well, it says here, fetch only relevant resources. Okay. Minify your code. So it is possible when you are writing web pages that you can minify more than just your jQuery. There are CSS minifiers, etc. as well. All right, jump back into the book then. There we go. All right. So they come in here and they start to talk about, they're starting to show you some examples, and they'll show you syntactically how this is going to be different from what we've been doing before, and hopefully try to convince you why you should use it. So when we take a or attempt to, there we go. All right. So what's changed? Well, take a look near the top here. Let's see. What do we have? Well, this looks different. All right. One thing, hopefully, that you'll notice is we are no longer going to be doing that alias at the top of the page. All right. With the dollar sign. Okay. We are, but we're not. And I mean by that is when we come in and we start using, when we come in and we start using jQuery, basically it'll be put in for us. That's a little not exactly true, but it sort of is. So what they show you here is this is what we looked at earlier for the FAQ that we did. And this is the equivalent in JavaScript and jQuery. So notice what we have at the top here. Dollar sign, then we've got document.ready. All right. That's going to be the equivalent. That is going to basically replace the document.addEventListener DOM content loaded. All right. That's basically going to replace it. All right. And you'll see that everything we're going to attempt to do is again inside of here. So let's take a quick look at what's changed. All right. Well, this looks weird. We've got dollar sign, then we've got dollar sign, pounds, or I'm sorry, double quote, pound sign, FAQS space, H2 dot click. What does that mean? This means that we're adding an event handler that says every time we click one of our H2s, and remember on that FAQ page, the F2s were the things that had the pluses and the minus signs associated with them. All right. So we want to grab the one that we just clicked. So notice we passed that event in here again. Now we're actually using it. EVT.currentTarget. So that says whatever H2 tag we clicked. All right. Then look at the comment underneath that. We're using, these are two of the jQuery methods. The first one is toggle class. So it's either going to turn the minus class on or it'll turn the minus class off. When it turns the minus class off, it'll basically be turning the plus class on. To go back and forth. Normally, or I shouldn't even say normally, with many of the jQuery features that we're going to look at, there is a way to do something, there is a way to turn something on, there is a way to turn it off, and then there's typically also a toggle. All right. So why would you use toggle? Well, if you use toggle on and off, as opposed to one method to turn them on and another method to turn them on, off rather. Toggle is kind of like a light switch. All right. You know, you go into a room and it's dark and you turn the light on. You leave the room and you turn the light off. Same kind of thing. So when we look in here, then also notice that down at the bottom, after we've got the toggle class and the next, and we're going to look at these in a little more depth and coverage in just a moment, we're again preventing the default action from happening. All right. Then finally, as it says, we're setting the focus on the first H2 tag. So this is what we're doing when we start. So in the past, we were doing the same kind of thing, all right, but we're doing it now using jQuery, all right? And think about this. Now notice what it says. It starts out very similar to what we saw before, $, then inside of parentheses and double quotes, # FAQS. So again, we're looking for something with an ID of FAQS, but then we're telling it to find out of all the A tags that are in there, all right, we're telling it to find the first one and set the focus onto that. It's similar to stuff we've been doing in the past, but it's syntactically different. So if we go back and we look here, all right, let's just go over a couple of the things that they say here. It says, it shows the equivalent jQuery. If you compare the two, you'll see that the jQuery is easier to read. Well, again, that's probably not true just because of the fact that you've never looked at jQuery before. But what they're saying is for somebody who, basically off the street, who's either never seen either of them or knows both, that the jQuery version reads a little better. All right. Notice it says the JavaScript has the add event listener method. It's no longer used. All right. And it says the click method makes it easy to attach an event handler basically to anything that has an ID associated with it or a class. All right. And then it says, in addition, jQuery selectors, and we're going to look at more of these as we go on, make it possible, again, to attach it to all H2 elements like that without having to use a loop. Kind of cool. All right. So it says that for basically, again, they're going to show 4 applications in this chapter. After this FAQ thing here, they're going to start with that email list that we looked at a while ago that had 3 fields in it. You had an email, a repeat email, and like a first name. I think that's what it was. We're going to look at that. We're also going to look more of the ones that we had looked at before as a class. We'll go back and look at this FAQ in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage. Then we'll look at the image swap one that we did in an earlier chapter. Finally, we'll look at the image rollover that we did in an earlier chapter. But we're going to now be doing all of these. We're going to be doing all of these using jQuery. All right. Okay. Also, notice what they mention here. The $ now, it's again an alias, but it's an alias for the word jQuery. And notice too, because whoever set it up like this. When you ever see it anyplace, it's always spelled like that. Lowercase j, capital Q, lowercase UERY. All right, it's just the way it's always been. So how do you include it in your web page? The key component in putting it into your web page is, if you're going to put it in your web page, they don't show it here, but we'll see it in a later example. In fact, I'm going to bring it up just because I want you to see this. This is going to be this is that FAQ one. Yeah, we can do it here. Good. Notice we now have 2 script lines. Always, always, always put the jQuery one in before your own, because you're oftentimes going to overwrite things that jQuery might be setting. I want to say that again. All right. Put in the jQuery one first. Also, notice on here, you're going to see this a little bit in the chapter. It's like, well, what the heck? You've got HTTPS in here. Yeah. This is grabbing jQuery from the internet. It's using something called a CDN, or a content delivery network. The advantage of bringing in jQuery with a CDN is you don't have to save it onto your machine. It's already out there under this website. All right. The disadvantage of doing it this way is you need an internet connection. So if you're working in some place without an internet connection, this won't work. All right. Now, some of the stuff that's in here we have talked about, some of it we have not talked about. They talk about compressed and minified and uncompressed and unminified. I've already shown you that. All right. A content delivery network, a CDN, as it says, it's a web server that already hosts jQuery for you. So you don't have to. So if I go back into my jQuery.com, as I've done several times already, and I again go to download jQuery, what you'll notice is if I keep going, keep going, keep going, there's this. So there's a lot of ways. Google has a CDN for jQuery, Microsoft does, CDN JS does, JS Deliver does. A really good place to start, just so you know, and I know we've looked at it once before, and that is to go out to cdnjs.com. If I go out there, I can add almost anything. So if I'm going to come out here and type in jQuery, there it is, the jQuery library. So if I go and grab that script and bring it in here, there it is. Now, don't worry about the other stuff that's in there right now. The key part is this, what you see right there. All right. And you'll notice it's 3.6.4, the same one that we looked at the beginning. You'll also notice if you look after this, it's like, well, hey, that's fine. What the heck else is in here? This thing says integrity, and there's a bunch of junk in there. And then it's got cross origin, and it's got refer policy. What those are attempting to do is you should always leave those in there, even though it makes it bigger. But the reason you should leave that in there is that is attempting to make sure that no one has gone in and tried to grab the version of jQuery that you have and they haven't manipulated it, where they could have put a virus in it or something else. All right, so the recommendation is you leave it all in there. All right. Now, they also talk about there's different ways that you can download jQuery. All right, such as there's basically there's a slim version of jQuery that doesn't include everything, but it's stuff that most of the time you won't need. The best thing to do is to go out there and take a look on this site, and then it'll explain all that stuff to you. All right. And finally, as it says, jQuery recommends you use that resource. This is what I just showed you, this integrity checking. And as it says in there, you can go over here to find out more about it if you want. They don't use it in the book just because it takes up a lot of space. All right. But it's recommended that you do. You can see in here, if you have any interest whatsoever, a little bit about the history of jQuery. So as you can see, it's about 17 years old. All right. And the last one they have in here, see, as you can see, when the book came out, and the book actually came out somewhere around the beginning of the year. All right. 2019. Well, it's been updated since then, and we're at 3.4.6. All right. So again, if you want more than I just gave you, give that a read. So let's start taking a look at how this is used. All right. When you use jQuery, it says you start by selecting an element or elements that you want to apply different jQuery methods to. Those methods are what I started showing you when we went out to jQuery.com and I clicked on the API documentation. That's a list of the hundreds of jQuery methods that are available to you. To code it as it says, You start by quoting a dollar sign, followed by a set of parentheses that contain a set of quotation marks. In the quotation marks, you code a CSS selector for one or more elements that you want to select. All right. And again, that dollar sign is an alias for the word jQuery. So they're saying you do it like this. You could do it like that, but there's really no reason. It's what, one, two, three, four, about 6 or 7 characters as opposed to one character. All right. So let's take a look at some of the examples that are in here. Let's skip these for a second. Notice the first example, dollar sign, then in the parentheses, P. That says go through the entire document and find me all paragraphs, all paragraph elements. The next one says find me any element with an ID of fax. Now, element, because remember, you can only have one ID name on a page. The next one is find me every element, all elements, all right, with a class of minus. All right. Then they get into descendants and adjacent siblings and general siblings. All they're trying to tell you here, and I didn't really go through that much of this, and neither did our book, the old book that we used, but you can go through there. I think it's much easier as you're working your way around a document to not use the adjacent and the general, etc. siblings and the children, just because it gets to be too complicated real fast. But the point is, you can use all the stuff you can use in quote regular CSS, you can use it in jQuery. And really what jQuery is it's a library, a JavaScript library that allows you to kind of supercharge your CSS. All right. Now, if we go back up to the top, this is the HTML, and then this is the jQuery that they're using on it. So for instance, this first one is going to find this paragraph, etc. All right. This is going to find whatever we said had an ID of FAQS, which was right there. This will find everything with a class of minus. And you'll notice there's a class of minus there with that H2. All right. And I don't know if that's the only one that's in here or not, but it would find 100 of them if there were that many. All right. So that's explained in here in more depth and breadth of coverage than I am. But what I'm trying to do is to give you an overview of this and, hit everything that's in the chapter, but not so overwhelm you that you're like, geesh, I'll never get this stuff. You will for 2 reasons. Number one, you have to. All right. Because if you want to pass the class, you basically need to understand this stuff. And second, it's like anything else. You keep repeating and repeating and repeating, and sooner or later it starts to make more sense. All right. So, as it says here, once you've selected the element or elements by method 2, you call that method using the syntax that we'll look at in just a second at the top of the page. All right. And it's pretty much the same way that we have been doing stuff to begin with. All right. Syntactically, will it be different? Of course it is. All right. We're using something that is different, but conceptually, we're doing it the same way. What do I mean? Well, let's look at the first example here. And you'll notice now we've got val. All right. Val is the way we used to use the word value just up to a day or so ago. But you'll notice that on all of these, except for submit and focus, they all have a get and they all have a set. When you use the get, val is always on the left hand. I'm sorry. When you use a get, val is always on the right hand side of an equal sign. Now, when you use val with a value in it, it's not on the left-hand side of an equal sign. You don't need the equal sign. So this is saying right now, go out, find something with an ID of gallons, grab its value, and assign that to a variable called gallons. On the other hand, so that's a getter. Get this value and assign it. This is a setter. This is saying probably it would be a text box with an ID of gallons. This is saying take what was in there and basically blank it out. So set it equal to the empty set. All right. The next one, as it says, how to set the text in an element. So notice email error.text. What is that? That's what we used before when we were using text content and we were trying to go in and, for example, we were trying to change what was in an asterisk and, change it to some words. All right. Then they also show, this is an important example right here because this is showing chaining. Notice last name dot next dot text. Last name is required. You can chain together different methods. So this is chaining. It does the next first, then it takes the output of the next method and it uses it as input to the text method. All right, but the point of that is that, again, this is referred to as chaining. Okay, all right. So notice moving the focus. There's a lot of stuff in here we've talked about, but what is different is most of these things will have a getter and a setter. And again, when you use the getter, you're grabbing the value from something on the web page. When you're using the setter, we're setting the value of something that's on a web page. All right. And you can see at the very top of the page there, they're showing you the syntax for calling virtually all of these method names. Now, all I did earlier was I showed you the add method. But again, it's important for you to realize that almost, if not every one of those things that was in here, all right, if not every one of them, then almost probably every one of them, when you click on them, they're going to have examples. They will have code examples, and they will explain to you exactly what's going on. All right. So, as it says, to call the method, you code the selector, and that selector has got a $sign before it. That selector will be in parentheses and in quotes. Almost always you see it in double quotes, even though single would work. Then you use the dot operator, the period. Then you put the method name in there. Sometimes those methods will require parameters. What do I mean? Well, think about it. Tomorrow, when we go in and we talk about animation and effects, if I want something to fade onto my screen or fade out of my screen, a parameter that I might give would be a time limit. So if I want maybe a header to fade in, I might say I want it to fade in over 3 seconds, which you now know would be 3,000 milliseconds. All right. As it says in that second bullet, when you use object chaining, you code one method after the other. Okay. All right. So what they're going to do for much of the rest of the chapter in here is they're going to show you charts, different ways that you can do this. Now, be this right, wrong, good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't matter. But they're going to show you immediately in here two different ways of doing the same thing. And when we look in here, this is the same example we just saw, exactly the same. But this is the shortcut. So if you just use the $sign and you don't include the word document.ready, it assumes you have included document.ready. Now, in every example that's in this book, the authors will do it the first way, the long way. because I think they're just trying to hammer across to you, all right, exactly what's being done in here. But either one of these ways will work. That's the key thing. So this example here, they do it showing the document.ready right there, but you could have done it this way just as well. All right. And this is pretty simple. You could have 15, 20, 30, whatever H2s on a page. Now, when you click any of them, it'll just come back with an alert that says this heading has been clicked. Also, notice that when you're doing this, we talked about this, but not in a lot of detail, but you've got a left parenthesis right there, and that parenthesis is ending here. And you've got a curly brace right here, and the ending curly brace is right here. And that doesn't matter which way you're doing this, it works that way, period. But typically what you'll find is whether you use document.ready or just the $sign, virtually everything, all right, much of the time, at least let's say, everything that you want to do will be put inside of either this set or this set. All right. Notice that second bullet there. The event handler for the ready event runs any method that it contains as soon as the DOM is ready, even if the browser is loading images or other content. That's why it says it works like that DOM content loaded that we looked at earlier. All right. In this book, it says the ready event method is always coded the long way, whereas if you'd been doing this for a living, you'd probably do it the short way, just because of the fact that it's less typing. All right. Finally, as they mentioned right there, when coding one event handler within the other, the use of closing braces, or whatever you want to call them, parentheses and semicolons is critical. We haven't been using semicolons except when we've been looking through the author's examples. All right, so let's start with this one right here. Again, there will be 4 examples that we're going to be going through for the rest of the chapter, which is about 20 or so more pages. All right. First, we will go over the email list application. Then we will look at the FAQ application. We will look at the image swap application. And finally, we will look at the image rollover application. All right. So if we look here, we looked at this quite a few chapters ago. All right. One thing that you'll notice if you look down here and here and here, when you first start the program, you've got an asterisk here and an asterisk there and an asterisk there, letting you know that each one of those fields is required. You can see that in here we did put in a value, so that asterisk went away. In here we put in a value, but the confirm email did not match the original email, so we get that message. We don't get a this field is required, we just get that they must match. And in here we left it blank, so we get the this field is required message. The HTML does not really look any different from anything we've done previously. All right, other than at the bottom, again, we've got not only our script statement where we're including our email list.js, but above that, again, must be above that, we're bringing in jQuery and we're bringing it in from a CDN or a content delivery network. All right, so the next part that's in here is what's new. And take a look in there and notice most of it is new. Why? Because we're rewriting what we did in vanilla JavaScript. We are rewriting it using jQuery. You'll see right from the get-go. And again, as the author mentioned, they're using the document.ready instead of just the $sign with the parens. All right. But notice, it says handle click on the join list button. So that's right here. So in other words, if you click the button, all the code in between here and here is going to run. If you click the clear button, all the code between here and here is going to run. You'll notice that we don't have anything in there that's setting up an event listener. All right. And we don't have that DOM content loaded in there anymore either. Now, when we did this before, right here, for example, forget about the click here, but we would say const email equals $, then in parentheses, we would have had in double quotes, # email _1 dot value. Now it's dot val. You can see there's a lot. I mean, the logic is identical between the two, whether you are writing it in vanilla JavaScript or you're writing it in jQuery. What's different, all right, what's different in there is the, basically the methods that we're using, okay? And it's a little different syntactically. Well, notice in here where we say email1.next.text, we had been using the next sibling and text content. So it typically, one of the reasons people like jQuery is typically it results in you having to do less typing. All right. But again, in here, what's happening is exactly the same stuff that was happening in the earlier version that we saw chapters ago for this program. All right. And if you don't like my explanation again, take a look at what's in here. All right. I mean, I'm presenting this to you in what I try to consider to be the most straightforward way possible. Is it possible that I'm missing something that's in the book by doing that? Yes, it is. Or try to do that. But that's why I strongly encourage you to keep reading the book with each chapter. All right. So next, more skills for working with jQuery. As it says here, the next three figures present more skills. All right. The first thing are the most useful selectors. These are not all of them. These are all things, all right, that are mentioned if you go out to jQuery.com. All right. I'm not going to run through any of them. All right. But many of them you're able to use without jQuery as well. Things like last child, nth child, etc. And the goal here is, again, I think I've said this kind of thing before. Don't worry about memorizing this. All right. But know where to go when you need to see if there is something that's been already created. Really, 99 times out of 100, if not more than that. All right. If you want to do something with jQuery and you're like, geez, I'm going to have to write a routine to do this, there probably is already one that exists. And you should go out to the documentation and use that rather than reinventing the wheel, as they say. All right. So then they give you some examples here. So notice how to select the LI elements that are the first child of their parent. What does that mean? This means just the first list item. What's the parent? The UL, right? So the first child would be just the first one. Here, how to select even elements in a table. All right. Now that's a little weird because as it says, here's an example where the numbering starts at 0. So the first tag would be even 0, 2, 4, etc., 1, 3, 5. All right. But notice what it says here. Figure 8.4 and this figure summarize the selectors you're most likely to need. It's not everything. And there are even going to be some more that are going to be mentioned later on in this chapter, and there'll be more in the next when they talk about animation, and even more in chapter 10 when they talk about forms. All right. I always love it when people, And authors put stuff like this, the most useful methods. No, it should say in parentheses there, in our opinion. All right. So when we look at those, the next one we've already looked at, as it says, get the next sibling. Previous, well, it means back up one and give us the one before the one we're at. Find, all right, as it says, search something and return something else. ATTR, which is short for attributes. CSS is cool. The CSS stuff in here is cool. All right, what do I mean? Well, look at go down about 3 or 4. You can tell the system to check something using JavaScript. And if something is true, you can do an add class. So you can add an entire CSS class to something. Why would you want to do that? Well, maybe if the person was, let's just assume for a second that you were creating some kind of an application for a company and you wanted to do something, but only if the customer's status was active. They weren't in inactive status. So you could test their status. And if it was active, you could do an add class. If it became inactive, you could remove the class. Or you could basically use a toggle and use that question mark colon attribute to toggle it between active and inactive. All right. And you can see there's an each in here. Run the specified function for each element in an array. All right. Who cares? You should. Because basically it's allowing you to do looping. All right. So when we look in here, here are some examples. I'm not going to read them to you. And again, I can't say this to you too many times. Don't worry about memorizing anything. Just know that when you look at something and you think either A, what the heck does that mean? You know where to go to look for it. Or B, I want to do this. I wonder if somebody's already written a routine to it. The answer pretty much most of the time will be yes, they have. All right, so the first one that we just looked at were useful methods. All right. The next one is useful event methods. So these are things that you might want to run when something else happens. All right. They mention as examples the ready method and the click method. Now, when you start to look at these, and this is one thing that's either really, really good about jQuery or really, really bad about jQuery, depending on your point of view. And that is typically there's, sometimes there's a half dozen ways to do the same thing. And when somebody says, well, which one do I use? Which one's the best? It's not that one is better than the other. They're just have given you multiple ways of doing the same thing. So sometimes the best way to do it might be the way that it's the least amount of typing. Other times it might be the one that makes the most sense to you or whatever, because they may or may not be the same thing. All right. So ready, as it says, that's that document.ready that we're using when the DOM is ready. Click, you've already seen that. In the past, our click has been almost solely used for buttons, but in the example in here, and really the example we used earlier too, for the FAQ, it was the click on the H2 heading or on the plus sign or the minus sign. If you've got a click event, you've also got a double click event. The mouse enter and mouse over and mouse out, you're going to see those at the end of the chapter. Again, when we look at some of the image stuff, then there's a hover. And again, a summary. These are not every single one of the jQuery event methods. All right. And if you look down here, we already looked at current target in an earlier example. As it says, gets the HTML element that triggered the event. All right, you already have been using prevent default. to prevent a default action from happening. All right, so like this book or hate it, but one of the things they do a good job on is sitting there and kind of saying, hey, this is all the stuff you'd have to kind of worry about. Then they show you examples of it, and then they summarize it. All right. Next, other event methods that you should be aware of. All right. These are you're probably as a new person are not going to use these as much. Not that you can't, of course you can. All right. Notice there's an on and an off. So this is attaching a click method to this clear. And you might say, well, I don't get it. Do you have to use that? No, it's another way of doing the same cut for it. That's what we've been doing. And do it this way as well, either turning something on or turning it off. Okay? And as always, they give you quite a few different examples in here. All right. So they mention on the bottom of the page here, when you use the shortcut, which is what we've been using all semester, it says you're actually using an on method. And then the methods called bind and unbind, as it says, were deprecated fairly recently. It says you may see them in older code examples, but you should avoid them. All right. As a language matures, as you'd guess, things are added to that language, things are removed from that language. All right. But the idea almost always behind this is to try to make the programmer's life easier. All right. All right. So the chapter ends here by talking about these three illustrative applications. It is 9:54. Let's go till about 10:10. We may finish. We may not finish by that time. We'll see. So again, the first one is this FAQ. What they're going to do with all three of these is they're going to show you the HTML, they're going to show you the CSS, and then after that, they'll show you the JavaScript and jQuery. All right. And to my knowledge, they haven't changed any of the HTML or CSS from what they had earlier. So you've seen this example in this chapter and in the previous chapter. All right. Notice that sometimes, I think just for spatial reasons, they only show you, as it says here, some of the CSS. All right. But in the examples that are actually in the book, all right, they have all of the CSS that's in there. So in other words, I've already got some of these opened. All right. And where are we here? So this is that example. But if I do come in here and I open up the CSS, you can see it's more extensive than what's shown in the book. Then again, they come through here, and every time before they show the JavaScript and the jQuery, they give you an explanation of what's going on. The good news is we've kind of already gone over this because we talked about how to do it using just JavaScript. The ideas are the same as what we talked about before. The only difference is syntax as opposed to JavaScript syntax. Then notice, because there's a good example in here as well. Notice there's a hide and there's a show. And they do exactly what you think they would do. All right. For lack of better words, they're pretty much making something visible or invisible. All right. So as they mentioned on the bottom of the page here, when you attach an event handler to a link, you often need to cancel the default action. All right, with the prevent default. We've already talked about that. You've seen that already. All right. Next is the image swap. If you don't remember it, it's this one where you've got 4 thumbnails, and anytime you click on a thumbnail in the bigger version that's down below, so if I clicked here, it would replace the lady with the fish and her net with these 2 guys. Again, what has changed? Well, they're showing you a little bit what has changed in here, not very much. You'll notice they added an ID for the caption. They added an ID for the image itself. And again, a little bit of an explanation. And when we come in here to take a look, here's the JavaScript and the jQuery. Now, if you look at some of the older jQuery documentation, pretty much when it first came out, all right, much of it said stuff along the lines of, hey, what we're doing is we are replacing every 100 lines that you're typing in with vanilla JavaScript will now be replaced with 10 lines of jQuery. That literally there was a tenfold cut in the amount of code. All right. That sometimes is true, it sometimes is not. All right. Now, one of the things that they talk about in here says when you use jQuery to work with images that aren't included in the HTML, preloading the images can improve performance. We talked a little bit about preloading the other day. And the idea is you want to make sure that you load them before you start doing anything else. The bad news is it'll take a little bit of time at the beginning of the program. The good news is once it's there, typically those images will be cached so that when they're needed by the program, they can be brought out as soon as possible. Finally, to preload an image, a new image object, and assign the URL for the image to that image object source attribute. So we could take a look, and I'm sure they've done it in here someplace, like in here. There's the main image. All right. I don't think that going over these in much more depth and breadth of coverage than we're doing right now is really going to help. And again, I have said this kind of thing before, and that is that for me to sit there and say, well, you know, we could go over all these, but I think it will make more sense when we go over an example or two from each of these chapters that'll be part of your labs and homework. I think that'll make more sense. At least that's my hope. All right. What this one is a little different with a rollover. If you look down here, it says in here, they're using the function for each. All right. And it says within the function for the each method, basically we're telling it to run it for each one. If hopefully you remember this one, you put your mouse over here and the image changes from one to the other. Again, look in here. This was our HTML from before. Here's our JavaScript and jQuery. It isn't that much different from what we did previously, other than stuff we've already talked about, meaning document.ready here instead of the DOM content loaded. All right. They're using arrow functions down here, etc. But syntactically, this is just another way of doing the same thing that we've been working on previously. All right. And I guess that's it. Now, before we finish up, all right, I didn't know how long this would take, but what I am going to expect is that by tomorrow, you will have read this chapter. I don't think I'm asking too much. And then notice we've got 2 examples from here. Develop and expand collapse application and develop an image gallery application. We will do one of those. I haven't looked at either one. We will do one of those two tomorrow when we start. Plus from the shorts, again, there's two in here. Redo the future value with jQuery and create a rollover application. Probably we won't do the rollover because there's already one in there in the book like that. So we might come back to this one. So we will rewrite the code for the future value app so that it uses jQuery. So you can probably plan on that one. And let's look at these. This was an expand collapse in an image gallery. Well, that expand collapse, you've seen this kind of thing, that if you click show less here, basically all this stuff in here will disappear. All right. And the other one is to do this image gallery application. Displays different images when you click on the different links. I don't know which one of these. I'll take a look at both of them this afternoon. But we'll do one of those two, and we will do this one. After we get done with that, we will go right into chapter 9. I should mention too, and I know I've said this kind of thing before, but if you are really struggling with this stuff, for those of you who continue to tell me I'm really struggling with JavaScript, go through the exercises at the end of each chapter. Try them. If you run into problems, you were already given the answers to these. They're in there with the information that you were given at the beginning of the semester. So as it says, add a clear button to a future value app, etc. Use different event methods for the image rollover. So if you really want to learn, develop a book list app. I think when you click on these, whatever one you click on, it comes over and it changes the book here. These are their web developer books. If you click here, then it'll open up their books on C# and other programming languages. So there's some neat stuff in there. All right. So tomorrow, and it's a shorter chapter, we'll go through this. Notice the first part is on special effects. And the second part is on animation. All right. Most of the animation that they show in this book here is fairly simplistic. All right. It doesn't have to be, but especially when you're learning something that makes the most sense. And finally, as you can see on the end here, when we get to the last pages, we will look at how to build a carousel and how to do that using JavaScript and jQuery. All right. So that's what I had. Grant, unless you had any other questions, all right, that'll be it for today.
Yeah, I think I just need to like reread that chapter and stuff. Yeah.
Hopefully that helped. All right, as far as
definitely.
going over it the way we've done it, but I guess time will tell, as they say. Now, hopefully you also, everybody watching this, what I've been doing is just basically everybody did okay on the first test for JavaScript. And what did we do? We made modifications, right, for the second test. We may make modifications for the next test with jQuery. I may have you do something else. I don't know. All right. I mean, there's some cool stuff you could probably end up doing with the rock, paper, scissors with animation when you think about it. All right. But we'll see as we go on. Okay. All right. Then I will talk to you tomorrow morning. I'll see you at 8:05. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too.